and good morning, perhaps good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching this. Welcome to Seawolves, the Friday show. And of course, before we get into what we're going to get into today, it's time to do a little toast, drink coffee to make the world a little bit better. And the world needs to get a little bit better. I think we can all agree on that. But the weather in Amsterdam is definitely starting to improve. We're going towards spring, so here we go. Are you with me? 3, 2, 1. That's good to toast with you all again. So, in this particular show, I want to talk about some technical stuff. Mainly the fact that I told you already during several of the other shows that I took out all of my instruments out of my boat about a little bit over a year ago now, in order to at some point start with a completely new suite. And the first question, of course, that I had to kind of answer for myself, and I guess this is something that a lot of sailors who want to kind of renew their systems on board is running into, so I thought it would make for an interesting show and hopefully also an interesting discussion in the comments and in the chat here over the coming weeks, and that is the old debate of Raymarine versus B&G. And of course there are several other brands, but you know, at least in Europe, these are really kind of the two brands to turn to. And finally, for my particular ship and my particular way of sailing, I decided that Raymarine was for me the way to go. And so I want to get into why I made that particular choice, so hopefully maybe it will help some of you to do the same. Now, of course, first of all, I have to kind of start by saying that different systems for different types of sailing, and kind of the first thing that maybe will jump out at some of you is that B&G is really considered kind of the system with the most sailing DNA, let's say, because Raymarine actually more based on a motorboat. They're widely used on sailboats also, but originally kind of the company kind of came more from the motorboat area, let's say. So how did I end up still choosing for the Raymarine then? Well, the first thing to know is I've used both systems. So the B&G is called themselves Triton. I think there's a new type name for the system actually now, and of course we have the Raymarine Evolution pack here. I use both of kind of the previous versions of these two systems on various different boats, so I kind of know how they are used and kind of in general what kind of the results of them are on different boats. The main thing for me to kind of start looking at these is to start a little bit with my own goals for sailing, and so I would say that I'm a day sailor who every once in a while makes a longer, like a medium range cruising trip, but I do day sail really a lot, especially solos, afternoons, evenings, when I just go out and solo sail by myself. So that's very important. Like I said, medium to short to medium range cruising trips, 3, 4, 5 days, sometimes 2 weeks, more or less, sailing every day, maybe 100, 200 miles, something like that, hops, sometimes longer, some overnights, etc. So that's kind of the range for me, and I hope, of course, in the next 2 years or so, also to do some cool solo racing with my boat, which is more kind of the amateur level racing, of course, but still. So those were kind of my thoughts and my prerequisites going into actually purchasing a system like this. And what for me was most important is that having sailed for a while now, having experience with systems breaking down and the maintenance and all these different things, I'm in a pretty sizable refit of the boat right now myself. The one thing that with sailing systems is that eventually they always break down or need maintenance, and they usually do that in moments when you least want them to. So the way I kind of approached choosing the different systems is as follows. So first of all, the displacement of my boat is about 9,000 kilos, so about 9 tons. So that puts me in a range where I cannot really use a small size Autopilot. So both Raymarine and B&G have kind of smaller tiller or under deck Autopilots, which are kind of light. But my boat is just slightly too big, slightly too heavy. It's kind of right on the cusp of where it would still be possible. I know a few owners who have my type of boat, who have a Raymarine wheel drive, for example, who say that they're more or less doing fine with it. But since I also tend to sail in some stronger winds and I don't really avoid stronger situation, I actually kind of like that. So I opted to go with a bit of a heavier system. So to look at the more heavier systems in the B&G and Raymarine ranges. And that kind of brings me to the point where really the things between the two systems start to get different. And the first is that I think it's important to acknowledge that the B&G system definitely has a few functions. For example, Predict Wind now has an option where the Predict Wind data, the grip files, can be directly downloaded into the B&G plotter, so that you have, so that it can, kind of calculate with your course information in the plotter in one system, instead of you having it on your laptop and kind of manually having to, figure out how the weather might affect your course, or you have to load it manually into Predict Wind and do your course there, and then kind of translate the waypoints and stuff to your plotter. So it's nice that B&G has integrated this and is kind of working together with Predict Wind, which is one of the most used services, I guess, especially if you're a long-term permanent cruiser. I think that's definitely something that will put the B&G system a bit above the Raymarine suite. There are also several extra layers of data input within the B&G system, where you can just fine-tune the different numbers and data about your individual ship a little bit better. However, you usually need a B&G tech for that. So B&G, if you install a system of theirs, they advise to bring one of their techs over to really install and tune it kind of to your specific situation, where Raymarine actually doesn't have that step. So their system just allows you to set it up yourself, which actually I like more than having to pay and invite somebody over to kind of install it for you. So for me, that actually kind of went the other way. But if you're a long-term cruiser or racer and you really want to get that final inch of precision out of your system, then the B&G might be better suited for that. But for me particularly, was not a super interesting function. What really for me becomes very, very important is the availability and the service. And so in order to really see kind of what the experience is, what I did is I actually called about 25 different boat stores, both in Holland, in Belgium and in France, to kind of ask the people working in the store about their experiences with people having either B&G or Raymarine systems breaking down, and how generally the customer service works. And so what I found is that B&G and Raymarine definitely have kind of different strategies when it comes to their customer service and how they approach the market. And so I'm not 100% sure of this, is just my feel from kind of what I got back from the different interactions. But it seems that because Raymarine is also giant in the motorboat world, which is of course I think quite a bit larger still than the sailing world, so they kind of do both. And so the numbers, I guess, for Raymarine are a lot larger than B&G. It's just a lot larger company. And so the first thing that really jumps out when you kind of go into the market is that the Raymarine systems are everywhere. The availability of the Raymarine systems is very, very good. Almost every store that I checked carried this entire system. It also comes in one box, so you have everything you need basically in one box to start. And this particular one is the Autopilot system with everything in it. While B&G, because I guess it's a bit of a smaller company, doesn't have kind of the stock out everywhere. And it kind of makes sense for a smaller company. I guess Raymarine's strategy is to just make sure that everybody is really well stocked up. But then on the other hand, there's really no way to really get in touch with Raymarine themselves. You can send them an email. I send them 3 emails actually, kind of telling what I was doing, also telling that I would do some kind of a review and video about, installing all this stuff and kind of, this video that I'm doing right now. But actually no reaction whatsoever. And it kind of makes sense, they're a very big company, so their service is basically done through the different vendors. And because there are, millions probably of people who are using these systems, they just can't really get too personal. So they're a big manufacturer and the customer service is located at your local vendor, and you're kind of depending on that for how good the service actually will be. And it's kind of the same for B&G. I also contacted them, no real reaction there. I got like a standard mail back, but it seems that nobody actually read the email that I sent them. And that's fine, that's just due to the size of the company, I guess. But so that means that if you need a replacement part, or if you need anything quick from Raymarine, in Holland, Belgium, and France at least, it's very, very easy to get it. Usually within 24 hours, you can pretty much find a replacement part if you need it. While for B&G, that is a lot harder. So through my talks with the different vendors, I found out that in general, if there's something that just isn't there for Raymarine, basically within a week, week and a half, you'll have it in your hands. While for B&G, sometimes it can last up to 3 or 4 weeks. And in general, and I really talked to a lot of stores and I really asked them a lot of questions, like, things that happened and, what was like the worst example, what were the best example, these type of things. And I just found that in general, the story that I got back between the two customer services is that that obviously Raymarine being the bigger company, having just probably much more in stock and doing much more sending, so it's probably also cheaper for them because they just have larger volume. That kind of translates to better service in the sense that you just get help quicker when you really need something. Internationally, this seems to hold also. So just looking at some sites in America, Canada, and other places, I generally found that stores are carrying complete Raymarine system and lots of replacement parts, whilst just for me to assemble the full Triton system of B&G, they don't even really sell it in one box. You have to just find all the individual parts. And I actually in Holland didn't find a single vendor that could just supply the whole thing for me. They'd usually have some parts in stock, and then there would be other things that would take a week or whatever. So it was actually sort of already hard to order it also. Then in the sailing itself, so for my sailing in particular, I use both systems on different boats. If you saw our video, beating into 45 knots, one of the first videos on this channel, where I was doing a bit of a cruising trip with 2 of my friends and we ended up in a bit of a storm. We were using actually the Raymarine system on that particular boat. So there are a few optimizations in the B&G that are definitely again, it can be very valuable if that suits your particular way of sailing. But for my mind, it feels that the potential extra hassle and waiting in case something goes wrong, plus the fact that I think that the system overall just gets more expensive because of the waiting, because of the fact that you need a specialized tech more often to set things up, because it's just a little bit less plug and play than the Raymarine system. That for me finally kind of made me choose to go with Raymarine, because it's really easy to install myself. Price-wise, as far as purchasing, it's not really that different from B&G. So most components and stuff cost about the same. Maybe D&G is like, a few tens of euros more expensive, but generally the same price range, not hundreds of euros differences there. But I think a lot of costs in, waiting time, hiring extra techs and all that stuff, where if I would go for B&G, then on the end of the line, if I add up all the costs, for my mind, it seems to come out quite a bit. I would say probably 25 to 30% more expensive than the Raymarine system. And so, that's kind of my deliberations for why I chose to go with the Raymarine system. So I started now with the Evolution Sail Autopilot set, and over the next few months I'm going to add the other components so that I get like a full system on board, and of course I'll share the videos as I'm installing. And yeah, I guess for those of you who are interested to see what it actually looks like on the boat, let's hop over on board and I'll show you what the installation looks like. So here we are back in the marina, and here in front of me is Spirit. As you can see, I cleaned and polished the hull really nicely, and today I'm here to put the third layer of, I'm making a new barrier coat, 4 layers of epoxy barrier coat to be exact. Yeah, as you can see, it's starting to look very nice. Gonna make a new blue stripe here for the waterline, and also a new blue stripe on top. And so I hope 2 more days. Today I'm gonna put on the 3rd coat, then tomorrow the 4th coat, then I have to wait for probably 2 days during the weekend, and then I'll be able to finally put on the anti-foul, and then we'll be and the stripes on the same day, and then we'll be ready to go back into the water again. So that's kind of the progress on the front now. So here is the Autopilot install in all its glory. It's about 90% done, and so this is what it looks like. So let me see if the light adjusts here. Yeah. So we have the basic components, which is the ACU. So that's the control unit, the computer, you know, the brain of the operations. Then we have this thing here, which is kind of the compass / gyroscope, which is very important that this is installed, you know, in line with the center line of the boat. Then we have here the backbone installed. I'll get to that into a second. And of course all of this talks to you know, the power in different ways, power supplies, which is my battery bank, which is on the other side of this wall. And then if we go here on the rudder bearing, we have the actual working part, which is the hydraulic ram that will be controlling my rudder bearing here. And then there's the one last part here, which is the rudder, which is the signal rudder that tells the computer what the position of the rudder is, and that's the final part that I'm going to be installing over the next 2 days. But I have to put like an epoxy platform in here because this is all kind of angles and I have nowhere yet to put it. But the basic setup is pretty simple, actually pretty easy to understand. So the heart of the operation is the ACU. Now that has a direct line to the RAM, obviously, which is talking to. It has its own line to the power supply, so you can see the kind of the thicker lines there, because this thing can draw up to 20 amps. So that's a thicker power supply that goes separately to the ACU. And then of course, to be able to talk to all the rest of the components, that is plugged into the backbone here. One of those white entrances is the ACU. Then we have the gyroscope and compass, which is also directly plugged into the backbone and also gets its power from the backbone, so that doesn't need any extra power. Then the backbone itself has a separate line for power, so that there are like 10 different you know, cycles of power, let's say, running within this system, some for information, some for actual power. And so the backbone has its own power supply, and some elements, like the computer here, have their individual power supply. So that feels a little bit strange when you're hooking it up to the batteries, because I have basically one location where I hook up everything to my battery bank, and so to hook one system up to the batteries twice kind of feels weird, but you know, I guess some of the components just draw their individual power. Then we have the blue line here, which goes to another kind of a combination piece, and that goes to the computer, which is located very conveniently here. So this is going to be my control unit, which is located conveniently right next to my wheel. So a very good position, a very handy position for that, and eventually also hope to put it on a remote control, so then I can just have it on my body and control it from everywhere. So, but all in all, a pretty simple setup. Like I said, the last piece that's missing is this, let me grab it here, is this little a control unit which is going to go somewhere in here and which is going to be moving in unison with this, and is going to be telling the computer what the exact position of the rudder is. You can make the installation without that, but then I guess the computer just kind of models the angle and actually calculates where the rudder is rather than know. And but with this it just knows, so it just makes the whole system a little bit more accurate, but it's also kind of a pain in the ass to install. But that's the last part I'm going to be working on for the Autopilot over the next 2 days, to create an extra platform here for that to stand level on, because it has to be lined out with the rudder bearing in two directions and then hooked up in a similar way that the actual ram is also hooked up to the rudder bearing. And so yeah, all of that comes in the box. The only thing I got additional was this blue wire, because I actually got a 5 meter long blue wire with that, because that goes to the computer, and I guess most people put the computer quite far away, the control unit quite far away from where the actual system is, but I only needed a very short one, so it cost me like I think 35 bucks for this small blue wire instead of the 5 meter long one. And I can probably use the 5 meter long one later when I put additional screens and stuff to this unit, which I'm going to want to put much more on the other side of the boat and perhaps also inside of the cabin. And so then a 5 meter long cable will be very handy to have. But so yeah, that's what the installation, obviously this is going to get covered and I'm going to tie rib everything, but since I'm still installing it, I'm kind of taking it one step at a time. But that's what the installation looks like so far. And yeah, like I'm not a super technician by any means, and so you know, it took me a little time to wrap my head around where to make everything. There are a few places within the power supplies where you also have to put some where you have to mount some breakers, so that always takes a little calculus. Like I said, the system draws 20 amps max, so you have to put some 20 amp breakers in all of the power supply lines at separate places. But that's pretty much the only thing that you have to kind of splice in yourself. The rest is pretty plug and play, so you just have to place the components obviously, and then you can just plug it into the backbone. And then as soon as I hook it up, you know, once I put the rudder information thing in there, as soon as I hook it up to the battery, it should come on and it'll go into the auto calibration mode. So can't wait for that. And 3 hours of painting later, as you can see, I'm still cleaning up my mess. But layer number 3 is looking pretty good. So that concludes my work day for today. So now I quickly gotta get back home. Thank you all for watching and see you next week. Ciao!